For nearly 2,000 years, one secret terrified the most powerful religious institutions on earth, so much that they systematically hunted it down, banned it, and erased it from history. It wasn't a rebellion or a political threat. It was something far more dangerous, the knowledge that you don't need a priest to talk to God. This is what the ancient mystery schools understood about death that the modern church has spent centuries trying to make you forget. The story begins long before Christianity existed, in a world where death meant something completely different. The ancient Egyptians, Greeks, and Romans didn't see death as the end of consciousness. They didn't see it as punishment or reward decided by distant deities. Instead, they organized their entire civilizations around institutions called mystery schools, and these schools had one primary purpose: to teach people how to die without fear, but not through prayer or faith or blind belief. They taught it through direct experience. Think about what that means for a moment. In the temples of Karnak and Luxor, in the sacred groves of Eleusis, in the hidden chambers beneath Rome, initiates underwent profound rituals that gave them personal, experiential knowledge of what lay beyond death. They didn't read about it. They didn't hear sermons about it. They experienced it. And when they emerged from these rituals, they possessed something that no amount of institutional authority could take away from them. They had conquered their fear of death through their own direct knowing. The ancient Egyptians called this knowledge the Book of Coming Forth by Day. This wasn't a religious text in the way we understand religious texts today. It was a practical manual. It was a roadmap for the soul's journey through the afterlife, describing in intimate detail what a person would encounter, what challenges they would face, and how to navigate them. But here's the crucial part. This knowledge wasn't given to you by priests who claimed special authority. You learned it through initiation, through direct participation in sacred rituals that showed you these realms yourself. The Egyptian mystery schools operated from the temples for thousands of years. They were civilization-scale institutions where the highest knowledge was transmitted in secret. Priests, astronomers, judges, and healers all went through these initiations. The temples weren't just places of worship. They were universities. They taught medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and philosophy. But underlying all of this was one core teaching: the secrets of death and rebirth. The Egyptians understood that Osiris, the great god of resurrection, represented not just a myth, but a living truth about the nature of consciousness itself. When you went through the Osiris mysteries, you symbolically died and were reborn. You experienced your own resurrection while still alive in your physical body. The Greeks inherited and transformed these teachings. The Eleusinian mysteries became the most famous mystery school of the ancient world, and for nearly 2,000 years, they operated continuously in Greece. These weren't small, obscure rituals. Alexander the Great sought initiation. Roman emperors traveled to Greece specifically to participate in the Eleusinian rites. The mysteries centered on the myth of Demeter and Persephone, on the descent into darkness and the return to light. But again, this wasn't mythology in the sense of fiction or metaphor. This was experiential teaching. What made the Eleusinian mysteries so powerful that they survived for 20 centuries? The answer is that participants reported something extraordinary. After going through the initiation, they lost their fear of death. Not because they believed something comforting, not because a priest told them they would go to heaven, but because they had directly experienced something in those rituals that changed their understanding of consciousness itself. Ancient writers tell us that those who were initiated looked at death completely differently from the uninitiated. They had a knowledge, a gnosis, that transcended belief. The rituals themselves were legendary in their power. Initiates would descend into darkness, experiencing symbolic death. They would journey through what was called the underworld, encountering trials and tribulations. Then, in a climactic moment of profound ritual, they would be reborn. The sacred drink, called kykeon, which modern researchers believe contained psychoactive substances, was part of the ceremony. The use of light and darkness, carefully choreographed drama, music, and carefully prepared psychological states created an experience so transformative that people reported it changed the trajectory of their entire lives. What the mystery schools knew that terrifies modern religion is this: direct spiritual experience destroys institutional control. When you've experienced something directly, when you've encountered a dimension of consciousness that transcends physical death with your own awareness, you no longer need an intermediary. You no longer need someone to interpret God for you. You no longer need a priest to tell you what happens after death, because you've glimpsed it yourself. You become, in the deepest sense, free. This is precisely why the early Christian church, as it consolidated power and became the institutional religion of Rome, had to suppress the mystery schools with such ferocity. It wasn't theological disagreement, it was survival. An institution based on the claim that priests hold the keys to salvation cannot coexist with a system where each individual has direct access to divine knowledge. The Gnostic Christians understood this. The early Christian mystics who maintained the esoteric traditions recognized that Jesus himself taught through initiation and direct transmission. When Jesus told his disciples that he had many things to tell them that they could not yet bear, he was teaching like a master of the mysteries. His parables were designed to speak directly to those who had ears to hear, leaving the uninitiated confused. This was the ancient method of the mystery schools transplanted into Christianity. But as Christianity became institutionalized, as it became the official religion of the Roman Empire, this esoteric tradition had to be eliminated. The church fathers, the bishops and theologians who were consolidating power, couldn't allow competing authority structures. They couldn't tolerate the idea that people might find God through direct experience, rather than through the church's sacraments and priests. So they branded the Gnostics as heretics. They burned their texts. They persecuted those who maintained these teachings. Then, in 553 AD, at the Second Council of Constantinople, the church made an official doctrinal decision that would reshape Western civilization. They declared the concept of reincarnation to be heresy. This wasn't a minor theological point. This was an act of supreme institutional strategy. You see, the mystery schools taught that the soul reincarnates, that we return again and again to learn and evolve. This teaching had several devastating implications for institutional religion. First, if the soul returns again and again, then your one lifetime is less significant. You're not living under the pressure of being judged for eternal reward or punishment in a single existence. Second, if you return again and again to work through karmic lessons, then institutional religion's promise to save you through faith or through the church's sacraments becomes less attractive. You're responsible for your own soul's evolution across lifetimes. Third, and most dangerously, if reincarnation is real, then the story changes completely. Death is not a final judgment. It's a transition. It's a doorway. And what lies beyond it is far more sophisticated and complex than a simple heaven and hell. Historians and researchers have found substantial evidence that reincarnation was taught in early Christian circles. There are references in the New Testament that suggest it. Many early church fathers speculated about the pre-existence of souls, which logically implies reincarnation. But when the institutional church decided to consolidate power in the 6th century, they made a choice. They eliminated this teaching. They rewrote history. They created the doctrine that each soul lives only once, faces judgment, and then goes to heaven or hell eternally. This doctrine served the church's interests perfectly. It created urgency. It created dependence on the church for salvation. The suppression was so thorough that for over 1,000 years the knowledge was driven underground. The mystery traditions survived in secret societies, in Freemasonry, in Hermeticism, in the Kabbalah, in mystical branches of Christianity and Judaism that had to hide their true teachings. But the institutional power of the church was so great that these traditions operated in secrecy, passed from initiate to initiate, hidden from the masses who were taught that only the church held the keys to salvation. What did the ancient mystery schools actually teach about death? Let's be specific about this. They taught that death is not an ending, but a transformation. They taught that consciousness continues beyond the death of the physical body. They taught that the soul has an inherent nature of light and immortality. They taught that we are not separate from the divine, but that we carry a divine spark within us that is eternal. They taught that physical death is like waking from a dream. You continue, but in a different form, in a different dimension of reality. But crucially, they taught that you could verify this knowledge yourself through initiation and practice. They taught methods of meditation and inner work that could give you direct experience of non-physical states of consciousness. They taught that you could actually experience yourself as a soul, separate from your body, before physical death occurred. They taught that the quality of your consciousness, your ethical development, and your spiritual refinement determined your experience after death and your conditions in the next incarnation. The Orphic Mysteries took this teaching further. They taught the wheel of birth and death, the eternal cycle of reincarnation from which only the spiritually refined could escape. They taught that you could break free from this cycle only through spiritual discipline, ethical living, and the cultivation of higher consciousness, not through faith in an external savior, but through your own effort and development. This is a teaching that places complete responsibility on the individual. The mystery schools also taught something that fundamentally challenged the religious worldview being developed by the church. They taught that salvation is available to everyone. Slaves, women, foreigners, rich and poor alike could seek initiation into the mysteries. This was revolutionary. It meant that spiritual knowledge wasn't restricted to a priestly class. It meant that anyone with a dedication and commitment could gain direct knowledge of divine truth. It meant that spiritual authority couldn't be monopolized by an institution. Compare this to the developing Christian doctrine. The church taught that salvation comes through the church and its sacraments. Only bishops could perform the holy rites. Only priests could intercede for your sins. Salvation was mediated through an institutional hierarchy. If you wanted forgiveness, you needed a priest. If you wanted communion with God, you needed the church's rituals. This created a perfect system of control. It made the church indispensable to spiritual life. The mystery schools represented a fundamentally different understanding of spirituality. They said that you're already connected to the divine. Your soul is already immortal. Your consciousness already transcends death. The initiation doesn't create this connection. It awakens it. It helps you recognize what is already true about your nature. The role of the teacher is not to save you, but to guide you toward direct knowledge of your own nature and the nature of reality. This difference was existential for the church. An institution can't survive if its core message is that people don't need it. The institutional church needed to convince people that they were separated from God by nature, that they were sinful and contaminated, and that only through the church could this separation be healed. The mystery schools taught the opposite. You already contain divinity. You are already whole. You're already capable of knowing truth directly. As Christianity consolidated power across Europe during the medieval period, the suppression of the mysteries became total in the Western world. The mystery traditions didn't disappear, but they were forced underground. Freemasonry preserved elements of the mystery teachings through its initiatory structure and its symbols. The Kabbalah, in Jewish tradition, maintained esoteric teachings about the nature of consciousness and reality. Hermetic philosophy kept alive the ancient Egyptian wisdom about the divine nature of the human being. But these all operated in secrecy, because the institutional church had the power to execute anyone teaching ideas that contradicted its authority. In the 19th and 20th centuries, as institutional religion began to lose its monopoly on spiritual life, the ancient teachings began to resurface openly. Helena Blavatsky, the founder of Theosophy, made reincarnation and the ancient wisdom of the mystery schools fashionable in Western society again. Edgar Cayce, the American psychic, gave thousands of past life readings based on reincarnation principles. Occult movements and New Age spirituality brought back teachings that had been suppressed for over 1,000 years. But here's what's crucial to understand. The institutional church didn't simply fade away when these teachings returned. Instead, it dug in. Modern Christianity remains fundamentally opposed to reincarnation. Modern Christian theology maintains that each person lives once, is judged, and then faces eternal reward or punishment. The very concept of reincarnation is considered heretical in mainstream Christianity. This isn't accidental, it's strategic. It maintains the doctrine of judgment and the dependence on institutional salvation. What the mystery schools knew about death that terrifies modern religion is that death is not punishment and is not final judgment. Death is a transition. It's a threshold you cross, and what lies beyond it is determined not by an external judge, but by the state of your own consciousness. Your karma, your accumulated actions, and spiritual development determines your experience in the afterlife and your conditions when you return. You are responsible, not God, not the church, you. This is liberating and terrifying at the same time. It's liberating because it means you have complete power over your destiny. Every action matters, every thought matters. Your spiritual development is entirely in your hands. But it's terrifying because it means you can't escape responsibility by having faith in a savior. You can't outsource your salvation to an institution. You can't be saved by someone else's belief or someone else's ritual. You have to do the work yourself. The ancient mystery schools operated on a graduated system. Not everyone received the same teachings. Initiates progressed through levels of understanding. At each stage, they were given knowledge appropriate to their level of development. The most profound teachings, the direct experiences of the divine, were reserved for those who had demonstrated the capacity to handle them responsibly. This wasn't elitism in the negative sense. It was based on the principle that certain knowledge is dangerous in the hands of those who aren't prepared to use it wisely. Modern mystery schools that have revived these teachings operate similarly. They emphasize that direct spiritual knowledge comes with responsibility. It's not something you just receive passively. It's something you have to earn through discipline, through meditation, through ethical development. The initiations are designed to transform the initiate at a deep level, not just intellectually, but at the level of consciousness itself. What makes this teaching so dangerous to institutional religion is that it's verifiable. This is the key. The mystery schools taught methods that you could practice yourself, you could meditate, you could do the inner work, you could eventually have your own direct experiences that confirmed the teachings. This is completely different from faith-based religion, which asks you to believe something you cannot directly verify and never will be able to verify during your lifetime. The Egyptian Book of the Dead and similar texts from ancient mystery schools are actually instruction manuals for navigating non-physical states of consciousness. Modern researchers have recognized that the symbolic language describes stages of meditation and inner experience. When you follow the instructions, you can have similar experiences yourself. You can verify that consciousness continues beyond the body. You can verify that you are fundamentally not your physical form. This is what creates the true conflict with institutional religion, not doctrine, not theology, but the simple fact that people who practice these methods begin to have their own direct spiritual experiences. They stop relying on priests to tell them what's true. They discover truth for themselves. And when you've discovered something directly, no amount of institutional authority can convince you it's false. The mystery schools also taught something about the nature of death that contradicts the Christian narrative of judgment and final placement. They taught that death is more like a change of scenery than a final destination. The soul continues to evolve and grow. You don't suddenly become perfect or fixed after death. You continue to learn and develop. If you were selfish and ignorant in life, you remain selfish and ignorant after death, at least initially. You have to work through those qualities. You return again to learn the lessons you haven't yet learned. This is the teaching of karma and reincarnation, and it's far more nuanced and sophisticated than the simple heaven and hell theology of institutional Christianity. It accounts for the apparent injustices of the world. If some people are born into wealth and health while others are born into poverty and disease, how can this be the work of a just God? The answer from the mystery schools is that it's karma. Each soul is working through lessons determined by its own previous actions and spiritual state. We're all exactly where we need to be to learn what we came here to learn. This teaching also means that life is fundamentally about learning and spiritual development, not about earning rewards or avoiding punishment, not about believing the right doctrine or following the right priest, but about developing yourself spiritually, about becoming a better human being, about raising your consciousness and understanding. Each incarnation is a classroom. Each challenge is a lesson. Each relationship is a teacher. The mystery schools also taught about different realms of consciousness and existence. They mapped out an entire cosmology of inner worlds that you could experience directly through meditation and initiation. They taught that physical reality is just one layer of existence. Beyond it are realms of increasing subtlety and power. These realms are real. They're not fantasy or imagination. You can experience them directly. And the beings who inhabit these realms are far more advanced in consciousness than we are. This cosmology makes sense of mystical and spiritual experiences that organized religion often dismisses or pathologizes. When someone has a vision or encounters a spiritual being, instead of exploring this as genuine experience, institutional religion often treats it as either demonic or mentally ill. But the mystery schools understood that these experiences point to real dimensions of existence that are accessible to human consciousness. What modern institutional religion fears most is exactly this: that if people begin to have their own spiritual experiences, if they begin to explore consciousness directly through meditation and inner work, if they begin to access knowledge that doesn't come from institutional sources, then the institution becomes unnecessary. This isn't a theological argument. It's a structural reality of how institutions work. An institution survives by maintaining itself. It maintains itself by controlling access to authority and truth. If truth is accessible only through the institution, if only the institution's representatives can interpret spiritual reality, then the institution is secure. But if truth is directly accessible to anyone willing to do the work, if spiritual development doesn't require institutional mediation, then the institution loses its justification. This is why the mystery schools had to be suppressed. This is why reincarnation had to be declared heresy. This is why direct spiritual experience had to be discouraged and even persecuted, not because it's false, but because it threatens institutional power. The resurrection of interest in ancient mystery teachings in the modern era represents a fundamental challenge to institutional religion. People are beginning to ask questions. People are beginning to practice meditation and inner work. People are beginning to have their own spiritual experiences. People are beginning to verify for themselves that consciousness transcends the physical body. People are beginning to discover that they don't need an institution to be spiritual. This doesn't mean organized religion will disappear, but it means its monopoly on spiritual authority is being challenged for the first time in over 1,000 years. The mystery teachings are resurging because they speak to something that institutional religion hasn't been able to address: the hunger for direct spiritual knowledge, the desire to experience truth rather than believe it on faith. The ancient mystery schools understood something that we're only now rediscovering in our modern context: that consciousness is the fundamental nature of reality, that death is not the end of consciousness, that each individual has the capacity to know truth directly, that spiritual development is a real process that unfolds over time and multiple incarnations, that you're not separate from the divine, but are an expression of it. These aren't beliefs you have to accept on faith. They're teachings you can verify through your own practice and experience. This is what made the mystery schools so powerful, and this is what makes them so threatening to institutions that depend on your not having direct knowledge of spiritual truth. The initiates of the ancient mysteries understood death in a profoundly different way than we do in the modern Western world. They didn't approach it with dread or denial. They approached it with preparation and understanding. The rituals they underwent weren't designed to comfort the dying or to give false hope. They were designed to train the consciousness so that when death came, the person could face it lucidly and consciously. They could navigate it with awareness. They understood that the quality of your consciousness at the moment of death determines what happens next. This teaching was carefully preserved and transmitted across centuries. The Egyptian Book of the Dead contains detailed descriptions of this process. It describes the judgment of the heart, where your actions and spiritual state are weighed, but this isn't an external judgment by a God who punishes or rewards arbitrarily. It's a natural consequence of your own spiritual state. You judge yourself through the reality of what you've become. Your conscience becomes your judge. Your karma becomes your destiny. The Greeks developed this teaching further through the concept of the underworld, the Hades that initiates journeyed through in their mysteries. But again, this wasn't a place of torture and punishment designed to instill fear. It was a transitional realm where the soul processed its life and prepared for rebirth or higher states of existence depending on its development. The soul had agency in this realm. It wasn't passive. It wasn't damned. It was evolving. This is radically different from the medieval Christian concept of hell and purgatory that developed as the church consolidated power. These concepts were explicitly designed to create fear. They were designed to make people believe that only the church could save them from eternal torment. The church taught that God was wrathful in judging, that most people would suffer eternally, that salvation was narrow and difficult to attain. All of this served one purpose: to make the church indispensable. The mystery schools taught the opposite. They taught that the universe operates according to law and principle, that justice is built into the fabric of reality itself, that you reap what you sow automatically and inevitably, that God or the divine is not wrathful but is the underlying harmony and order of existence, that you are fundamentally capable of spiritual development and evolution, that redemption and growth are always possible. The future of spirituality lies not with institutions, but with individuals taking responsibility for their own spiritual development. It lies with people practicing the methods that the ancient schools preserved, recovering direct knowledge of consciousness and the afterlife. It lies with people discovering that what they've been told to believe through faith, they can actually know through direct experience. It lies with the resurrection of practices like meditation, contemplation, and inner work that the mysteries taught. It lies with people understanding that their consciousness is not limited to the physical brain, but extends into dimensions of reality that science is only beginning to explore. The neuroscience of consciousness is beginning to validate what the mystery schools taught millennia ago. Studies of meditation show that it creates measurable changes in the brain and nervous system. Studies of near-death experiences show that consciousness can operate independently of the body. Studies of past life regression show that memories exist that cannot be explained by current life experiences. All of this scientific evidence is pointing toward the same conclusion that the ancient initiates reached through direct experience. Consciousness is not produced by the brain. The brain is an interface for consciousness. This understanding, when it becomes widespread, will transform human civilization as profoundly as the Copernican revolution transformed our understanding of the cosmos. When people truly understand that consciousness continues beyond death, when they internalize that their actions have karmic consequences that extend beyond this lifetime, when they recognize that they are responsible for their own spiritual evolution, the entire structure of control and fear that institutional religion depends upon collapses. What the mystery schools taught about death goes far deeper than simple beliefs about an afterlife. They taught a complete understanding of consciousness and the true nature of the self. The personality and body are temporary vehicles. The true self is eternal and unchanging, pure consciousness that continues after death, unaffected by the death of the body. When you understand this deeply, death loses its terror. It becomes simply a transition, a doorway to another realm of existence. This understanding was at the core of every mystery school teaching, passed down through thousands of years. This is the knowledge that was suppressed and hidden. This is the knowledge that is now returning. And for the first time in centuries, ordinary people are beginning to have the experiences that were once reserved for secret initiates in hidden temples. The mysteries are no longer hidden, the knowledge is no longer restricted, and the implications of this shift are only beginning to unfold. The ancient mystery schools knew that death is a threshold, not an ending. They knew that consciousness continues. They knew that you are responsible for your own spiritual evolution. They knew that direct knowledge is possible, and they built entire civilizations based on these truths. Now, as we face our own mortality and search for meaning in an increasingly uncertain world, these ancient teachings are speaking to us again, not as historical curiosities, but as living wisdom that can transform how we understand ourselves, death, and the nature of existence itself. The question that the mystery schools posed millennia ago is the same question we must pose today. Do you want to know the truth through direct experience, or will you accept it secondhand through institutional authority? The choice, as always, belongs to you.